It is the day before you have to go and write RE1 for key individuals. You might feel a bit overwhelmed and you felt like, okay, let me go and search on YouTube for video content, searching RE1 videos. And for some reason, video content on YouTube on RE1 is extremely limited. We don't have a lot of videos on RE1 on YouTube. And people have been begging us at RLP Training, please do more RE1 related things. Please share RE1 videos. Well, here you have it. The time has finally arrived. So a very important thing to remember. Between RE5 and RE1, the content is extremely similar. There's about I normally say between 90 and 95% similarity in the content. Phase stays phase. The code of conduct stays the code of conduct. FICA stays FICA. The financial sector regulations stay the same. The acts don't change. The content of the legislation don't change just because you're writing a different version of the exam. The way the questions are asked, though, that's kind of the tricky part. For RE5, you had to prepare yourself for the exam with the mindset of a representative. You had to think on, oh, when I interact with a client, what must happen? Now, RE1, you will no longer interact with clients. You will manage representatives. You will manage and oversee the phase-related business of the FSP. You will establish and implement policies to make sure that your FSP is compliant. So same content, but different mindset to it. Where as a representative, we just had to understand consequences of non-compliance. In RE1, we have to have policies and procedures in place to prevent the non-compliance. I'm Yolandi, I'm from RLP Training, and I will be your facilitator in this session. Let's get to it. You're writing the exam tomorrow. We have to make sure that you are prepared in an administrative way as well. Very important, you need to have a valid ID document with you. So your original ID card or ID book, your driver's license, the original, or your original passport. Your driver's license and passport must be valid. If they have expired, it won't be accepted. Right, so no certified copies, nothing else. If you're going to use a temp, my advice to you would just be to scan that temp, send it to Moonstone in advance, and just ask them, will you please accept this, so that you have that on email if you go to the venue and show the invigilator, listen, I already communicated with Moonstone. They know about my temp ID. Right. I've heard about some venues not accepting temp IDs. I've heard about some venues accepting temp IDs. So that's why my recommendation to you would just be scan it, send it to them beforehand, get approval so that no one can tell you to turn away from the venue. Right, next, answer in pencil. I don't know why people are so scared of answering in pencil. I am terrified of answering this exam in pen. And I do it quite often. I do it. This is my job. I'm a professional RE5 and RE1 exam taker. Pencil. Guys, very important. If you don't know, and I'm sure everyone knows by now, that your exam paper, your question paper is unique. No two people sitting in that exam venue will have the same question paper. Yours have a very unique barcode at the end or at the bottom of the question paper and your answer sheet. They match. The answer sheet and the question paper barcode match. So if you make a mistake with a pen, one, you're not allowed to use Tipp-Ex or any correction fluid. Two, you won't be able to fix your mistake in any way. You can't draw a line through it and color in a different little blocky or koliki or whatever you want to call it. So please use a pencil. I always only go to the venue with my ID. I use the pencil that they provide me with. I use the eraser that they provide me with. All of these conspiracy theories saying that, oh, don't use their utensils, they will erase it or they will do this. It's a bunch of nonsense. Instead of allowing your brain to take in conspiracy theories, focus on studying. Right? I have a whole TikTok video on the conspiracy theories. They're all nonsense. Then, very important is notice the negative questions. Guys, this is something that even I still do. I wrote RE5 again today, and there was one question where I nearly, and I always say this after the exam, there's always this one question where I nearly got tricked. Okay, so when they ask you for the incorrect option in the exam, the word incorrect will be in capital letters. There we go, incorrect. Take a highlighter with you, make sure that you highlight this word in a specific color. So I like to say Yellow is my negative question color. So every time I see a yellow highlighted mark on my question paper, I know that I have to choose the incorrect answer. And then for some reason, I don't know if it's nervousness or it's just our brain that wants to go for the correct answer, we just don't select the incorrect answer. So please notice those negative questions. Then read carefully, very carefully. Reading is almost as important as studying. Don't start with the question and think, oh, I know where this is going, let me go to the answers. Or go to the answers and don't read the entire line and just start reading it and, oh, yeah, no, I know where this is going. Don't do that. It's not a contest. No one is going to give you a trophy for finishing first. So please do read carefully. Right. Then, when in doubt. So obviously, there's always one or two questions, a level 4 questions, analysis question where it might not feel familiar, or the type of question feels like I didn't study anything that has to do with this. If it's a phase question, then we always think on what will protect the client the best, what will be the best for the client. If it's a FICA question, we think on what will protect our country, what will protect the money of our country, right? And then last reminder, this video is recorded on the 8th of November 2024. It's going to go onto our YouTube channel, probably today still. Make sure that we haven't had any changes in legislation. We are going to go through the levy calculations. Currently, we do have rumors going around that the levies will increase. They won't increase before the end of this year. They might increase with the new financial year. So please do make sure that when you watch the video, that all the levy calculations are still the same. I think that's the only thing that has an amount attached to it. So nothing else we know of will change in the near future. Right. Let's get to it. So phase typical questions. In RE1, the phase typical questions stay very similar to the phase typical questions that we got in RE5. So you need to know the different roles and functions of the different role players. What the FSCA does, what the commissioner does, what the compliance officer does, what the FSP does, what the key individual does, the representative, the ombud, those guys. Very important to know when to appoint a compliance officer. So it says that in the Act, it says any FSP that has more than one key individual or one or more representatives must appoint a compliance officer. Right. So if I have one key individual and I have no representatives, I don't need to appoint a compliance officer. Right. The trick that they will try and pull on you here is they'll tell you that the FSP is a sole proprietor. And what was the one that I got today? Sole proprietor called Wonder Trade or something like that. And they appointed a key individual and a representative, or a key individual and they've got no representative. Very important for you to remember from your studies that when we have a sole proprietor, this sole proprietor must be registered as a key individual. Which means that if the sole proprietor appoints an additional key individual, we then have two. So if they tell us that a sole proprietor appoints a key individual and has 0 reps, is it required for them to have a compliance officer? Yes, because them telling you that this is a sole proprietorship tells you that the owner must be a key individual. Then important to know the purposes of the Phase Act. Why do we have the Act? So the first reason we have the Act is to regulate how financial services are rendered to clients in the financial services industry. So basically just to control the environment. Second reason is to repeal or amend certain laws. So any piece of legislation that is in conflict with Phase and not in favor of the client will be overwritten by Phase. And then the third reason why we have it is to do what? Why can't I remember? Oh, to create a financial services environment. So to create a community for financial services, the term that they use in the Act, or the sentence, is that to create a space for matters incidental thereto. So anything that has to do with financial services. So the 3 purposes: to regulate, to repeal or amend, and then to provide for matters incidental thereto. Licensing, extremely important. This was also important in your RE5 studies. Very important in our RE1 studies as well. So as the key individual, in my opinion, if the FSP loses their license, not because the directors were found guilty of fraud or something like that, anything else for non-compliance with the Act, 95% of the time it's going to be because the key individual did not do their job properly. All right, so just a reminder, I'm not going to go through the categories in this video because we do have a separate video available where we explain the categories. The FSP must have a license at all times if they render financial services. To get this license, the FSP has to apply for the license. So the application process looks like this. The FSP submits an application to the FSCA for approval. The commissioner will then look at the application. He might request additional information, and then he makes a final decision. He will either grant the license. If it is granted, then he will issue the different conditions and restrictions on that license, and the license is then issued, printed, or whatever. Or he will refuse the license. If the license application was refused, he has to give you reasons for the refusal. If the reasons included something like whether the directors were not fit and proper in terms of honesty and integrity, or the key individual will not be the appropriate fit for the FSP, they can fix that and reapply. Not fix it and continue with the application. Fix it, reapply, start the process from scratch. Right. Every single license will come with standard conditions. So we've got standard conditions and we've got specific conditions. Specific will be specific to every FSP, so then we can't really study anything because it will depend on the FSP. But standard conditions stay the same throughout. Now, standard conditions include the FSP must at all times have an approved key individual. You will see this rule pop up numerous times in your studies. It's not a once-off rule. So it's very important. The FSP must at all times have an approved key individual. Then the 15-day rule. Any profile changes of the FSP must be communicated to the FSCA within 15 days. A profile change is anything like changing your address, your contact details, contact person, anything like that. 15 days, a little tip, is in the Phase Act, it's always 15 normal days, Monday to Sunday, public holidays included. There's only that one business day in the Code of Conduct that we will get to a bit later. Right, 15-day rule. Then every FSP must keep a rep register. This register must be kept up to date, and when any changes happen on this register, the FSP has to submit the updated version of this register to the FSCA within 15 days of the change. Then it says when the FSP, or if the FSP, changes their name, an amended license must be requested. Whatever the registered name of the entity is, must be what is reflected on the FSP license. We also have to make sure that we don't fall for the trick in the exam where they say, oh, the FSP changed their name. Do they have to request a new license? No. An amended license. A new license and an amended license is not the same thing. Right, last one, the FSP is only allowed to deal with product suppliers that are also authorized insurers and FSPs. Okay. Operational ability, important for RE1. The operational ability for the FSP must at all times be proven. Now it says for the FSP to comply with operational ability requirements, they must have a fixed business address, adequate storage and communication facilities. Well, those are two basically. So storage and filing facilities for record keeping, communication facilities in terms of email access, telephone lines, fax lines, whatever way they can communicate. They must also have a bank account with a registered South African bank. And again, this rule pops up, they must have a key individual. Right, those are the operational ability requirements for the FSP. Then the display rules. These questions used to be more popular, I feel. I haven't really gotten as many of them recently as I used to. So how must our license be displayed? The FSP must display a certified copy of the license in a prominent and durable manner within every business premises of the FSP. So this one sentence has so much potential in it to become 20 different answers to the question. Certified copy can only be certified by the FSCA because they keep the original. So any question or answer that leads to the idea that you will have the original in your possession will be wrong. Okay, the FSCA keeps the original. They supply us with as many certified copies as we require. We do pay for those copies, but it cannot be certified by a random lawyer or a random accountant or by someone from your local police station. Next part, prominent and durable. It has to be displayed prominently and durably. Prominent means it has to be visible. So keeping it in the receptionist drawer, not visible. Putting it up against the wall, visible. Okay, prominent. Durable means it must not be easily destructible. If I can just rip it off the wall, tear it to pieces, it is not durable. Right, so that's why we see it behind glass, framed, something like that. I've seen very fancy ways of displaying licenses that look very cute, but they're always behind glass or framed or something like that. And then the last part of the sentence, within every business premises, not just the head office and regional offices, not just at offices where clients are consulted, every single business premises. Right. We're going to skip suspension, withdrawal, and lapsing, but we will get back to it. Undesirable business practices. They love asking questions on undesirable business practices. And it's not a very big part. If you go and you study the board notices, if you go and study the legislation, you'll see that a very small part actually refers to undesirable business practices. But then we get 6 questions in the exam on it. So they tend to ask the same thing, more or less, over and over in the exam. But what is an undesirable business practice? So an undesirable business practice is a business practice that the Commissioner has declared undesirable and he has published it in the Government Gazette. Once it is published in the Government Gazette, we have to immediately comply. The general public, FSPs, everyone, gets 21 days to give their opinion about it. So if they want to make a submission and say, I don't agree with this or whatever, they have 21 days after the publication to do that. During the 21 days, it is still an undesirable business practice. Okay, he's not going to wait for the 21 days to pass and then finalize it. It's going to be finalized the day that it's published. If he then later decides to withdraw it, then you will be notified. Okay, so the moment it's published, we have to comply. Now, types of business practices that are seen as undesirable is any practice that will harm the relations between the different role players, between the FSP and the client, between the FSCA and the FSP, so between anyone involved in the industry. Then anything that will deceive the client, anything that will mislead the client, anything that will unfairly prejudice or discriminate against the client, and anything that will unfairly affect the client is an undesirable business practice. Now it says here that obviously we do not all read the Government Gazette every day. I'm sure most of us have probably never even read any part of the Government Gazette. So it is possible for an FSP to have continued with an undesirable business practice unknowingly. If that is the case, if they were unaware, they acted in good faith by continuing with the practice, they did not know, then the FSCA will grant the FSP 60 days to rectify the damages caused to the client to the satisfaction of the FSCA. If the authority gives you the 60 days to rectify the damages and the FSP does not do it, then it becomes a phase act offence and we will see worse consequences. Okay, so that is if the FSP did not know and continued. If they did know, if they were very much aware of the publication and they still continued with the undesirable business practice, then it is a phase act offence and that's when we see the big penalties come in. Right. After undesirable business practice, something that also gets asked quite often is what is the Medical Schemes Act relevance to the FSP environment? And what it says is that if you're an FSP in the Health Services Benefits class of business, so essentially you will be offering health policies, medical aid policies, you need to have 2 licenses. They're not both licenses, but you need 2. So you need your FSP license that we all know about, and then you also need accreditation under the Medical Schemes Act. But what it also says is that the requirements to get your license are identical to the requirements that you need to maintain, obtain, prove to get your medical schemes accreditation. So because the requirements are exactly the same, if you have the one, you'll get the other. If you lose the one, you'll lose the other. So regardless of which one we apply for first, if the one is approved, the other one will be approved. If one is then suspended, the other one will be suspended. If one is withdrawn, the other one will be withdrawn. If one has lapsed, the other one will lapse. Whatever happens to the one will happen to the other one. Right. Okay, let's get into suspension, withdrawal, and lapsing. So our burger, it looks like this, and they do like asking questions about this, so important to understand it. Okay, definitely not the best burger I've ever drawn. The top part of the burger is always withdrawal. The bottom part of the burger is always lapsing. The middle part of the burger is always suspension. Right, so what is the best part of any burger? Even if you are a vegan, the best part of the burger is whatever is in the middle, right? That's the best part of the burger. So this is the best way to lose your license. Why is suspension the best way to lose your license? because you can get it back. It's not gone forever, right? You can reinstate your license. You need to comply with the requirements to reinstate your license, and you can get it back. So this is normally due to cases of administrative non-compliance. So the FSB did not pay their levies on time, did not submit their annual financial statements on time, did not submit some kind of report or compliance report on time. License will be suspended. It's not forever, temporary, can be reinstated as soon as the requirements have been met. With the two buns, the top bun and the bottom bun, they've got something in common, these two. Both these cases, license is gone forever, can never get it back. So both lapsing and withdrawal, license is gone forever. Withdrawal is the top bun because that is the entertaining way to lose your license. Why is it entertaining? It's got sesame seeds, it's got pizzazz, it just has that little bit of attitude, right? Withdrawal is the serious way to lose your license. You don't want to lose your license this way. We, the public, we like it. Not okay, we don't like it when you lose your license this way, but we find it entertaining. Okay? You will be on the cover of newspapers. You will be talked about on radio stations. Everyone will know. We think Steinhoff, we think drama. Okay? Withdrawal, major or serious cases of non-compliance. The license is gone forever, can never get it back. The owners will be debarred from applying for a new license for a period specified by the Commissioner. I have seen periods vary from 5 years to 30 years, depending on the seriousness of the non-compliance. Gone forever. Right. Last one, lapsing. Lapsing is the boring way to lose your license, and I think everyone will agree that this is probably the most boring part of any burger. Who ever thinks about the bottom bun of a burger? No one, right? That's how boring it is. Lapsing is boring. Now, it says in the Act, the license of a natural person FSB or a sole proprietorship will lapse when the owner dies, becomes permanently unable to continue business due to mental or physical illness, has been finally liquidated or finally sequestrated. Finally, and I'm saying the word finally like this because it's important. When they use the word provisionally, it is not a final liquidation or final sequestration. So provisional, wrong, right? Or in the case of any FSB, all FSBs, not just sole proprietorships or single-owned FSBs, if they voluntarily surrender the license, they just won't be active in the financial services environment anymore, or they close down the business becomes dormant. Again, that's it. If we decide we're going to voluntarily surrender our license today, and a few months go by or a few years go by, and we decide, oh, let's go get that license back, let's get back into business, we have to apply for a whole new license. Okay, because it's a bun, it means it's gone forever. Both buns gone forever. Important for the examiners to know who initiates what. So lapsing is initiated by the FSB. Suspension is initiated by the FSCA. Withdrawal is initiated by the FSCA. Okay, the FSCA does not lapse licenses. The FSCA only gets involved when compliance becomes an issue. Lapsing, not initiated by the FSCA. Right. Phase penalties. So we all know the phase penalties, up to 10 million rand or up to 10 years imprisonment or both. Just make sure that when you answer that question that you read the question. Because if they ask you what is the maximum monetary penalty, you will just say 10 million. If they ask you what is the maximum imprisonment, you will just say 10 years. If they ask you what are the possible penalties, you will say up to 10 million, up to 10 years or both. So read the question, very important. Right, about the representative, you have to know, as the key individual, you need to know so much about the representative. You need to know everything about the representative. You will manage the representative. You will be in charge of their appointment, in charge of their fit and proper status, in charge of all of it. So you need to know representatives. Important to know the definition. When is someone a representative? When are they not? Any person that provides financial services, that means they give advice or provide intermediary services in terms of the FASE Act, to clients of the FSB will be seen as a representative. When they give you a scenario and they want you to identify who is a representative in the scenario and who isn't, you ask yourself, does this person exercise any kind of judgment or influence that will lead to the client making a decision on a financial product? Okay, if this person does not lead the client into making a decision in terms of a financial product, chances are they're not a representative. Right. In our mock test, we have a few questions on this where we try and convince you someone is a representative that actually isn't. And you need to know, you need to be able to identify those scenarios. You need to know what a DOFA is, date of first appointment. That is the day that the representative started with a financial services provider in a phase role for the very first time ever. Not necessarily for the first time with your company or with the company before you, the first time ever. So if we have someone that started their career in insurance with MyWay as a consultant, and they got put on the rep register, then they resigned at MyWay, they went to Outsurance. They resigned at Outsurance, they went to Budget. Okay? The DOFA will be on the day that they got put on the register for the very first time, which was with MyWay. Right? Then important to know the fit and proper requirements for representatives. Why is it important? Because you will be appointing them. So you need to make sure that they are fit and proper. Now we know honesty and integrity, not negotiable. Our reps must have honesty and integrity at all times. So you can't go and work under supervision until you gain honesty and integrity. And it's a personal characteristic. So what the representative, well, with all of us, what the representative does in their personal capacity outside of their working environment, outside of work hours, will affect their honesty and integrity. Okay. So also important to know the timeline. So I said honesty and integrity not negotiable. Competence, second fit and proper requirement. This one is a bit negotiable. Why is it negotiable? Because no one is born competent, right? So we have to allow you to work under supervision to gain competence. Now competence has two parts to it. It's got an experience part and it's got a qualification part. Now the experience part depends on your appointment or the representative's appointment. The product category that they've been appointed for, whether they've been appointed for advice or just intermediary services or both. There we've got different tables that we can consult to look at the experience requirements. Qualification. So with qualifications, we start with the entry-level qualification. Now to appoint a representative, the entry-level qualification for a category 1 or 2 1 or 4, sorry. So the entry-level qualification for a category 1 or 4 representative is that this person must have grade 12 or a certificate or an academic achievement equivalent to grade 12. If we have a category 1 representative that will only be executing sales, nothing else, grade 10, or an academic achievement equivalent to grade 10. If we have a representative in the category 2, 2A, or 3 space, then they must have a phase recognized qualification at NQF level 7, which is a degree. So this means they don't have the full 6 years to get their qualification, okay? Because they must already have the phase recognized qualification. These are the entry-level requirements. So category 1 and 4 representative, grade 12. Category 1 rep that will only be executing sales, nothing else, grade 10. Category 2, 2A or 3 rep, a phase recognized qualification at NQF 7, and that means it's at degree level. Yay, you meet the entry-level requirements, we can appoint you under supervision. Now, once you have that date of first appointment, your timeline starts for you to become completely competent. Now, if you are a category 1 or 4 representative, your timeline looks like this. You've got 3 months for your product-specific training. This is not necessarily going to be once off every time that a new product is introduced to you or you're appointed to offer services on a new product. You will get product-specific training again. You will not be allowed to sell the product or work with that product unless you've had product-specific training. Then the next one is once off, 12 months from your date of first appointment to complete your class of business training, 24 months to complete your RE5, and then 6 years or 72 months for your phase recognized qualification. If you're a representative for a category 2, 2A, or 3 FSP, then your timeline looks a bit different because remember, you already have your phase recognized qualification. So your timeline is not that long, and that's horrible drawing, we're just going to leave it like that. You still have your 3 months for product-specific training. You still have your 12 months for class of business, and you've got 24 months for RE5. Okay. You don't have 6 years for a phase recognized qualification because that was an entry-level requirement already. Okay. Now, once our representatives are done with the qualification requirements, so they've done their product-specific training, they get a certificate. Done with class of business, got a certificate. Passed RE5, got a certificate. completed their recognized qualification, got a certificate. Once the reps have all their certificates, that is when CPD becomes a requirement, because CPD promotes ongoing learning, lifelong learning, continuous professional development. This is the FSCA's way of making sure that our representatives keep themselves up to date with changes in legislation, with updates in legislation, with updates in business practices and things like that. And we'll look at the CPD calculations a bit later in this video. Right, debarment. Today I received, I don't know, I would say almost 10 questions on debarment in my exam. Debarment, very important, especially as the key individual. It's going to be your responsibility to decide when to debar a representative and how to do it. So debarment, very important to know, is debarment is to prevent a representative in certain circumstances from rendering financial services to clients because they do not meet the fit and proper requirements, right? So it's not about the reputational risk for the FSP, it's about the entire financial services environment. Now it says here that rules for debarment, if the FSP wants to debar a representative, the reasons for debarment must have become known to the FSP while that person was their representative. They cannot, after the rep has left, now realize, oh, this is what the rep has been doing, and now want to debar them. Okay. It says that the FSP must follow a process that is fair, that gives the representative an opportunity to respond, that allows the representative to have a legal representative if they want one. So the whole process must be fair. We need to know that the FSP has to issue a letter of intent to that rep stating the intention to debar them, the grounds of the debarment, and anything that will be attached to the debarment. So in addition to the debarment, what else will happen? The FSP then has to provide the rep with their debarment policy and procedure to make sure that the representative understands what debarment is, how it will work, who is involved, what is expected of them. They then have to allow the rep to respond to that, consider the response, make a final decision, and immediately communicate that final decision to the representative. They then have to inform the FSCA of the debarment with a debarment notification form that we download off of the FSCA's website. That form must be submitted to the FSCA within 5 days after the rep was debarred. Now, because we debarred the representative, we're obviously making a change to our rep register. We have to submit our updated rep register within 15 days. And then we have another 15-day rule here where it says that full reasons for the debarment, evidence, documented proof, whatever, must be submitted to the FSCA within 15 days after the debarment. So we have 5 days, 15 days, 15 days, debarment. Now, to reappoint a debarred representative, we have representatives that were debarred due to lack of competence, so they did not get their qualifications in time according to the timeline. For those guys, we can reappoint them as soon as their qualifications have been obtained and they still meet the fit and proper requirements. If a representative was debarred due to lack of honesty and integrity, the reappointment is a bit more intense. So it says at least 12 months must have passed since the debarment before we can reappoint this representative. All of their unconcluded business must be concluded. All of their legal proceedings or complaints must be concluded. They have to meet the fit and proper requirements. And then the FSP that will be handling the reappointment, we need a confirmation letter from this key individual of this FSP confirming that they believe all the requirements have been met. We need an affidavit from the representative stating that all the requirements have been met. And then the FSP 5 form is then submitted to ask the FSCA to put this rep back on the central rep register. And I normally remember it as RE5 for representatives, so FSP 5 for representatives. Okay. Supervision, we need to know who can be a supervisor. Now in class, I normally ask the guys, can a neurosurgeon supervise a dentist, or can a dentist supervise a neurosurgeon? And everyone's always like, no. And then I like saying, but why not? They're both doctors. Okay, but they're not the same doctors. So exactly the same concept with supervision. The FSP, if it's a natural person, can supervise. The key individual can supervise. Another representative can supervise, as long as whoever is appointed as the supervisor for a rep is completely fit and proper in the exact same product categories, classes of business that they will be supervising for, they can be a supervisor, right? When the FSP appoints a rep under supervision, they must disclose to the client that this rep works under supervision, and they must have a supervision agreement in place with this representative. And go read about the requirements for the supervision agreement. And then the rep register, I hope that, because it's the day before you're writing, I hope that you have downloaded the rep register off of the FSCA's website to familiarize yourself with it. If you haven't, do that, download it, fill it in. Use your own details, your friend's details, your husband, your boyfriend, your children, whatever. Put their details in there just so that you can familiarize yourself with the register. This way, when you get asked a question on what must be on the register, you ask yourself, what did I have to put in about myself? Or what did I have to put in about my husband? Okay. So don't go and make it up. Just put people that you actually know, put their details on there so that you can refer back to that in the exam. Right, CPD calculations, basic calculations. So this is the easier way for CPD to be calculated. We just said that once our representatives have all their certificates, that's when CPD becomes a requirement. And it's also a requirement for key individuals and the FSP if the FSP is a natural person or sole proprietor. So it's not just for the representative. So it says that whoever has to do the CPD, if that person is appointed in one class of business and one subclass, so product categories basically, then 6 hours will be required. If that person is appointed in one class of business but 2 or more subclasses, 12 hours will be required. The moment the person is appointed on the rep register for 2 or more classes of business, it does not matter how many subclasses, 18 hours will be required. Normal, this is the easy one. This is also the one that you had to study for RE5. But this is RE1, so we have to just kick things up a bit, right? So, sometimes our representatives will qualify for a discount on CPD hours. The first scenario where they will qualify for discount is if they were not actively on the rep register as a fully competent rep for the entire cycle, the entire CPD cycle. And just a reminder, the CPD cycle is from the 1st of June to the 31st of May. Okay, so this representative only completed their phase recognized qualification in October. So from October, they need to comply with CPD. They qualify for discount on CPD hours. Now, we are not allowed to take a calculator to the exam, so they won't overcomplicate these calculations, but you need to know the formulas. It says here that the formula for this scenario is x divided by 12 times y equals z, where x is the number of annual CPD hours required in normal circumstances, y, the number of months appointed as a rep, and z, obviously, then the required hours. So if we have a representative that had to do 12 hours, so one class of business, 2 or more product categories, let's say subcategories, there we go, 12 hours would be required. They were only appointed for 10 months of the cycle. Our calculation would look like this. 12 divided by 12 times 10 equals z. So now we know 1 times 10, and that means this person requires 10 hours of CPD. And for some reason, in my experience, it can be different when you go and write tomorrow. They normally ask the 12-month one because it's easy to get to 10. Okay, so that's normally what they would ask about. And it's an easy one to do without a calculator. The other scenario where our rep might qualify for a reduction in CPD hours or some discount is if they were absent from work for a long time, maybe due to illness or maternity leave, or they had to take care of a family member that was ill, then they also qualify for reduced hours. So again, we have a formula, x divided by 12 times 12 minus y equals the required hours. X is still the number of annual hours required. Y is the number of months absent from work. Okay, so if our representative was absent from work for 2 months, we will have, let's give them a requirement first. One class of business, 2 or more subclasses, so 12 hours required. They were absent for 2 months. Okay, so we then start with, again, 12 divided by 12 times 12 minus 2. And you thought you're never going to use algebra again. You thought maths in school were useless. Look at us now using it as adults. Okay, so 12 divided by 12, 1 times 12 minus 2, 10. So again, we will have 10 hours required. And again, in my experience, this is their go-to in the exam. Okay. All right, then about the key individual. Now, when you studied for RE1, whether you used our study guide or you just studied straight off from legislation or someone else's study guide, you notice that, whoa, there's not a lot of information on key individuals. Yeah, maybe a few pages, but not as much as you would have thought you would have to study in preparation for the key individual exam. And it's just because we don't see the larger picture. Everything has to do with the key individual, because the key individual is the person that manages and oversees all phase-related business of the FSP. So everything, licensing requirements, code of conduct, disclosures, everything has to do with the key individual. Now, important to know our fit and proper requirements for the key individual. Obviously, honesty and integrity still in place. Competence must be done, cannot work under supervision, so you must already have obtained the necessary qualifications, already have the experience. They'll already be compliant with CPD, must have operational ability as well. Okay, so a key individual is the person that implements new policies and procedures, that reviews them, that enforces them, that manages the representatives, debars them, appoints them, assigns supervisors over them. In my opinion, I already said this earlier in the video, I said that when an FSP loses their license, it's normally because of the key individual. So to me, how I see it, if people picture that, okay, but why? Why do we need a key individual if we have an FSP? I want you to imagine the very, very big FSPs. Imagine Discovery, imagine Sanlam, imagine Santam, imagine those big guys. They're directors. Those guys don't have the time or the energy, and I think in some cases not even the relevant knowledge to walk around on sales floors and in compliance audits and make sure that everything is compliant. They don't have the time to make sure every phase thing is in place. They're business people. They need to negotiate deals. They need to negotiate investors. They need to keep shareholders happy. Okay. So the key individual is actually the face of the FSP. And everything that the FSP has to comply with, the key individual has to make sure the FSP complies with. Okay, so that's their role and function. You also have to make sure that the accounting obligations are met. Okay, so the first thing that I see on the screen now is the auditor appointment. Very important for the FSP to know that an external auditor must be appointed, not just a random internal person. External so that we don't have any conflict of interest. External auditor must be appointed over the FSP. This auditor must be approved by the FSCA. They need to understand what is required in legislation from the FSP in terms of accounting principles. And then if the business relationship between the FSP and the external auditor ever comes to an end, so the FSP fires the auditor or the auditor decides not to extend their contract with the FSP, whatever the reason may be, the auditor has to inform the authority, the FSCA, the commissioner, on why this business relationship ended. And if they were going to submit a report on any irregularities or suspected irregularities, they still have to submit that. They're still obligated to do that. Right. Then the levies. FSPs must pay levies to the FSCA. You should know this by now. Now, let's look at the calculation. I hope it's the calculation that's next. Okay, it's not the calculation yet. Okay, just keep that in mind. I will repeat that last sentence before we get to that. It's also in terms of the accounting obligations, the key individual's responsibility to make sure that the FSP complies with the financial soundness requirements. Now, financial soundness refers to the financial resources that the FSP must have available. Okay, I have seen them ask a question in every key individual exam that I have written this year on this. So one question in every exam, every RE1 exam that I have written this year. So there's a block. And in the legislation, if you go and download it, you have the same block, the same table that shows you the financial soundness requirements. Okay, so I'm going to show you an easy way to remember it, but we first have to work through it. So what we have here is we have the different FSP categories on this side. So we've got category 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. And throughout your studies, you should have noticed by now that the rules for category 1 and 4 FSPs, they're not as strict as for the middle guys. Okay, just again, side note. Then the table has the additional asset requirements, working capital requirements, and liquidity requirements. Liquidity requirements are basically referring to cash flow. Okay, So for our category 1 FSB, we don't have any additional asset requirements, but it is a requirement that our current assets must exceed our current liabilities, which basically just means that we need to own more than we owe. Okay. Liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 4 out of the 52 weeks of annual expenditure. So we basically have to have 4 weeks worth of expenses available in cash flow. 4 weeks out of the 52 weeks of the year. Right. Category 2, no additional asset requirements. Current assets must exceed current liabilities, so we still have to own more than we owe. Liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 8 out of the 52 weeks of annual expenditure. So our cash flow must be equal to at least 8 weeks, or must be worth at least, 8 weeks of the 52 weeks of expenses must be available in our cash flow. Right. Category 2A, and again, don't worry if you're stressed out now, I'm going to show you an easy way to remember this table. Category 2A, here we do have additional asset requirements. It's no longer just enough for our current assets to exceed our current liabilities. That's still a requirement, but that's not enough. We must also have assets that exceed the liabilities of the FSB by at least 3 million rand. And here, our liquidity requirement is that we must have liquid assets equal to or greater than 13 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure. Category 3, we also have the 3 million requirement. So again, our current assets must exceed our current liabilities, but that's not enough. Our assets must exceed our liabilities by at least 3 million. And again, our liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 13 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure. Last one, category 4. Category 1 and 4 rules normally not that strict. So no additional asset requirements, we need to earn more than we owe, and we're back at only requiring liquid assets equal to or greater than 4 out of the 52 weeks. Okay. So how I've memorized this little table, big table, is I have just gone and memorized these numbers. So the moment I see a question in the exam pop up regarding the financial soundness, I go and I do this. I say 4, 8, 13, 13, 4. That's it. I go write that down. Then I tell myself, okay, this is in order of the FSB categories. So then that means this is category 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. Okay. I know that we've got 52 weeks in the year, so all of these digits are actually out of 52. 52, 52, 52. Now, remembering when the 3 million is a requirement, category 2 and 3, 2A and 3, we've got 13s. The 13 has a 3 in it. So in both these cases, 3 million is a requirement. Okay, so the 3 million goes with the 13s because they have 3s in them. And then the middle block, well, technically the middle one, this one stays the same for everyone. Everyone's current assets must exceed their current liabilities. Okay, so that's not something that we need to remember. Where does that one go? It applies to everyone. So if we just remember 4, 8, 13, 13, 4, boom, financial soundness memorized. Okay. Levy calculations. Okay, so as the key individual, it's going to be your responsibility to make sure that the levies are paid on time. It's not your responsibility to pay the levies. It's your responsibility to make sure the levies are paid on time. Now again, category 1 and 4, the requirement's not that strict. So it says for a category 1 and 4 FSB, they must pay the annual levies before the 31st of October every year. The maximum levy amount, and I must not have a zoomer moment, so let's collect myself there. The maximum levy amount is 1,956,451. Okay, 1,956,451. That's the maximum levy, which means that if we do the calculation and we get to an answer or an amount that is larger than this maximum levy amount, we only pay the maximum amount. Okay. Now again, a reminder, you are not allowed to take a calculator to the examination, so they won't ask you to calculate the levies due. Okay, but they can ask you what is the maximum amount. They can ask you what is the base amount. They can ask you what the formula looks like. And disclosure, this is something that I told you in the beginning of this video. They are currently reviewing the levies, so it might increase sometime soon. This video was recorded on the 8th of November, so please, if you're gonna watch this video sometime in the future, please just go and double check these levy amounts. Okay. All right, so maximum levy amount 1,956,451. Calculation, how do we calculate? So for category 1 and 4 FSPs, we have a base amount, which means that we always start with this amount when we make the calculation, so 3,792 Rand. Then it says we have to add to that A times 605, where A is the total number of key individuals the FSP had and the total number of representatives the FSP had at 31 August of that year. Okay, so that's basically going to be if we had one key individual, no representative, then we're going to say 1 times 605. Okay, and that's going to give us our levy amount. If we had 10 key individuals and 100 reps, then that would have been 110 times 605. Again, don't stress, you're not going to have to work this out or do the calculation because you're not allowed to use a calculator, and it can get very impossible to do this without a calculator. Our levy calculations for category 2, 2A, and 3 FSPs, here they're a bit more complicated because the middle ones are always complicated. Luckily, the date stays the same. They also need to be paid before the 31st of October every year. Maximum amount stays the same, 1,956,451. I'm getting good at this. All right, so the calculation here, we also have a base amount that's larger than the one we had before. So our base amount here is 7,642 Rand. Then we need to add A times 605, again where A is the amount of key individuals and representatives they had on their register on the 31st of August. Then we also have to add B times 0.0000184595. And B is equal to the value of the investments managed on behalf of clients by that FSP that they had on the 30th of June that year. So I think this is more evident that we will not be able to do it without a calculator. So they won't ask you to calculate the levies. In my experience with the exam, if they ask questions about the levy calculations, they normally ask about either the base amount or the maximum amount. Right. Okay, code of conduct, equally as important as it was for RE5. It might feel like you have not as many questions on the code of conduct as you did in RE5. That's because you now have an exam of 80 questions, where RE5 was 50 questions, and a big part of that was the code of conduct. So you might get an equal amount of code of conduct questions. It might just not feel that heavy because of the 30 extra questions that you've got. So important to know the general duty. General duty of all FSPs is to render financial services at all times honestly, fairly, with due skill, care, and diligence in the interest of clients and the integrity of the financial services industry. Stunning, beautiful. How do we get to that? By complying with specific duties. The specific duties say that all representations made and all information provided must be factually correct, in plain language, adequate and appropriate, must be done timeously to give the client enough time to make an informed decision, may be done orally but must be reduced to writing within 30 days. Writing must include all sums, charges, remunerations, commissions, anything that has a Rand value attached to it that the client will pay either to the FSP or to the product supplier. Right. Then it goes into conflict of interest. It's kind of unavoidable in our industry. That's why it must be managed by a conflict of interest management policy. Our clients need access to this conflict of interest management policy. In the policy, we need to disclose to the clients what conflict of interest exists, what measures were taken to avoid the conflict of interest, what relationship do we have with a third party that could give rise to conflict of interest, and any financial interest that the FSP or the rep may become eligible for. So it's not even guaranteed, it may become eligible. That must also be disclosed. In terms of record keeping, in the code of conduct, we basically mostly focus on transaction record keeping. Okay, so transaction record keeping, it says that the FSP must keep record of all transactions for a period of 5 years after the termination of the product, not after the rendering, after the termination of the product or transaction. So we are allowed to keep records either electronically or physically. It does not matter as long as they are safe from destruction, as long as we can record both verbal and written communication, and as long as these records are retrievable. Okay, if we can keep them in storage but we can't retrieve them, it's useless. Right. We are allowed to make use of a third party for record keeping, but we'll talk about that I think in the next few slides. Then custody of financial products and funds. Any FSP that will keep custody of client products and funds must have a separate trust account for client funds, for their the client's belongings basically. So what it says here, and this is the only business day that we have in phase. Okay. The whole Phase Act, it's always normal days, Monday to Sunday, public holidays included. Here we have a business day. So it says that when the FSP receives clients' funds for safekeeping, the client will pay in that money to the FSP's normal transactional bank account. But the FSP must have a separate trust account for client funds. Because we keep all client funds in that one account, we have to protect everyone's money, so we can't give out the banking details of that account. Can't do that. Because I've got your money in there, and I've got your friend's money in there, and I've got your cousin's money in there. I need to keep everyone's money safe. So the client will pay in the money to the FSP's normal transactional account. Once the FSP receives the account or the money in their account, they need to immediately issue a written receipt to the client. After they've received the money on the account, they've got 1 business day to transfer the money to the trust account, to the dedicated client account. Right, in this account, there will be charges. We will see deposit fees, we will see withdrawal fees, we will see interest earned, we will see other monthly account fees. So it's important for us to know that deposit fees, we deduct from the client's funds. Withdrawal fees, we deduct to the client funds. Interest earned belongs to the client. We can't take the client's interest. And any other account fees, whatever, the FSP has to pay. Right, important. Then disclosures, we've got the disclosures for the product supplier, for the provider, about the product or service itself. Important thing, the disclosures for our product suppliers. We need to disclose basic contact details, the contractual relationship between the FSP and the product supplier. We have to disclose the product supplier's compliance and complaints department details. Then, if the FSP holds more than, and the more than, important, if the FSP holds more than 10% of the product supplier's shares, that must be disclosed. Not 10% exactly, more than 10%. And then if the FSP received more than 30% of their total remuneration in the last 12 months from this product supplier, it must also be disclosed to the client, because that's a possible conflict of interest. And it's in the last 12 months, not the last financial year or the last calendar year. Right. Advertising, important to know the advertising rules, important to know the advertising record keeping, important to know about telephonic advertisements. So just a reminder on telephonic advertisements, it says that all telephonic advertisements must be recorded. If the client says, no, thank you, I'm not interested, we only keep the recording for 45 days. If the client says, yes, I am interested, we keep the recording for 5 years after the product was terminated. Complaints handling, you can prepare yourself for a lot of complaints related questions. They're going to ask you about the categories of complaint. If you did your workshop with us, you had the handout with the different buckets. So every complaint has to go into its corresponding bucket. We have to categorize complaint. We have to have an escalation and review process, all of that. Also, part of our RE5 videos, because the code of conduct stays exactly the same. So I would recommend that you go and review that. And then rules for advice, the needs analysis, the record of advice, what happens when you cannot do a full needs analysis but you're acting on client instruction, important things to go by or to just repeat and recap and refresh on. Right, record keeping. We tend to think, and I'm probably just as guilty as everyone thinking this, that I'm not going to study record keeping. I know record keeping. I know 5 years, blah, 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 blah. Okay? There's more to it. Yes, 5 years, great. We now know that records must be retrievable. They can be kept either electronically or physically. They must be kept safe from destruction. All of those rules. Okay, but what is the purpose of record keeping? Record keeping is there to prove to the FSCA that we are compliant. So we don't just have to keep record of transactions. We also have to keep record of anything that can prove our compliance. That means we keep record of every compliance report for 5 years after the report was submitted. We keep record of our financial statements for 5 years after they were submitted. Okay, everything is a requirement. All right. Then the third-party rules. So it says here that we are allowed to use a third party to help us with record keeping. So we can use a record keeping company. But this third party must be an entity that will not charge us every time that we want to retrieve our records. Okay, we'll pay a monthly or an annual subscription fee. That's fine. Okay, see this video is close to an hour already, so let's not get into it anymore. All right, so the OMBIT. Important to know that, and just a reminder, because not necessarily for exam purposes, but people do get confused because we are all in different parts of the financial services industry. We deal with different OMBITs. Okay. This OMBIT, the one for the exam, is the phase OMBIT. No other OMBIT. Okay. Not OSTI, well, that's the OMBIT for short-term insurance. Not that guy. Not the new national insurance OMBIT thingy. Not the motor industry OMBIT. Not the banking OMBIT. No other OMBIT. Okay, just the phase OMBIT, and he deals with phase-related complaints only, nothing else. So his jurisdiction, he only deals with phase-related complaints. He only deals with complaints that were first referred to the FSP, and the FSP could not resolve the problem to the client's satisfaction. He only deals with phase-related complaints that happened on or after 30 September 2004, because that's when phase became effective. Then he does not deal with any complaints that were already submitted to court. And if during the complaints process with the OMBIT the client approaches any court, he will stop his investigation. He has a monetary jurisdictional limit of 3.5 million rand. If your study guide says 800,000, it is outdated. Okay, 3.5 million rand. This means that he is allowed to make decisions and instruct the FSP to compensate the client up to the value of 3.5. If a client lost more than that, and they went to the OMBIT for compensation or to resolve the complaint or whatever, they will forfeit the difference. Okay, so if they lost 5 million rand, they decided they're not going to go to court, they're going to go through the OMBIT. The OMBIT's going to tell them, okay, you lost 5 million. You know that if you come to me, the most I can get you is 3.5 million. The client says yes, okay, then he will accept it. His possible rulings, he will either dismiss or uphold a complaint. If it has been dismissed, it basically means the FSP has won. And I always say won like this because no one wins. It's not a formal court case. If he upheld the complaint, then obviously he ruled in favor of the client. Part of that, he is allowed to then tell the FSP to compensate the client for their damages up to the value of 3.5 million rand. He's also allowed to issue a directive, so give the FSP an instruction like saying you need to debar the representative that was in charge here or that was involved here. He has the same authority as any court in our country. His determination has the same effect as any judgment in court, but he will not ever send anyone to prison because he does not deal with criminal activities. Okay, to go to prison, you must have been found guilty of a criminal offense. That's not within his jurisdiction. Right, and then he has admin power and determination powers. He is also allowed, in addition to him being able to decide who's right and who's wrong, he is also allowed to make administrative decisions in the office of the OMBIT. Anyone that wants to appeal the OMBIT's decision can go to the Financial Services Tribunal. And then just a little background on him. The OMBIT is a person qualified in law, has a law degree, and must have at least 10 years experience as either a judge or an advocate, because that's technically what he is. He's a judge, right? He decides who's right and who's wrong. And then he also has to have relevant financial services knowledge. Okay. FICA. This is our second last slide. So if you're almost asleep and you just want to know how long you still have to wait for me to be done, we're almost there. FICA, very different to phase. So phase is all about protecting the client. We love the client, okay? We want to do whatever the client needs. We want to listen to the client. We act on the client's instruction. And it's just sunshine and flowers all around. FICA, we don't care about the client. FICA, we care about the country. FICA, we now accuse our client of possibly being a money launderer or a terrorist. Okay, so the purpose of the FIC Act or FICA is to combat money laundering activities and the financing of terrorist-related activities. This act was given to us by the United Nations, and it is not related to phase in any way. Phase and FICA, not brother and sister, not cousins, not related. They're not even friends. They're not even from the same continent. Okay, they're as much friends with each other as I am with Taylor Swift. Two very different things. Okay, so here we also have different role players. Now, how are FSPs affected by FICA? And that's kind of the core and what we need to understand when we study FICA is the FSCA is one of the supervisory bodies for the Financial Intelligence Center, which is the enforcement entity or the enforcement body of FICA. And the supervisory body wants us to realize how FICA will impact the way we do our phase-related business. Now, not all FSPs have to practice FICA. Not all of them have to be FICA compliant. So make sure that you go through the list and see which FSPs are accountable institutions. So all investment FSPs, long-term insurance FSPs, cryptocurrency FSPs, those guys have to comply with FICA. In general, our short-term insurance environment excluded from FICA. I got a question this morning when they said the FSP has a license to render services in short-term insurance. Which of the following FICA obligations do they have? None. Short-term insurance exempted from FICA. Okay. So we have the center, the Financial Intelligence Center. The center is the enforcement institution of the Act, but our FSPs that are accountable institutions, they will report to the FSCA. That's the supervisory body. We need to do customer due diligence, CCD in FICA terms, but luckily in the exam they don't use all of the 10,000 abbreviations that we have in FICA. So customer due diligence refers to the FSB verifying the client's identity and their particulars before conducting any business with that client. If you're an accountable institution, you must conduct due diligence with your clients. If you deal with a client that gives you any suspicion, that asks you for funny refunds or tells you that they are a drug dealer or something like that, we need to report it. Reporting is not snitching on your client. It is not getting your client into trouble. Your client will not get a criminal record or anything like that. It is simply informing the FIC of a specific transaction that they should be made aware of. It doesn't mean necessarily that if you reported a client, you're not allowed to conduct business with them. Because if that was the case, then no one would ever report anything, right? So it says that if a transaction is suspicious or unusual, but you can still verify your client's identity and your client is not on the United Nations sanctions list, then you are allowed to continue with the transaction even if you're going to report the client. It says that we have to report cash transactions above the cash threshold amount. Now the threshold amount is 49,999 Rand and 99 cents, and this refers to cash. Like I can touch it. Client comes with a briefcase, puts it down, open it, poof, cash. Okay. So from 50,000 Rand upwards, we have to report that. We are allowed to take the cash. It doesn't say we're not allowed to take the cash. We're allowed to. Your company policy might not allow you to, but legally we are allowed to. We must just report and tell the FIC, listen, the client purchased this product in physical cash. Okay, that's it. They want to be aware of it. They want to see if they can find out where the money came from. Penalties under FICA, because it's American, it's very dramatic, up to 100 million Rand or up to 15 years imprisonment, right? Very dramatic, but not both. With phase, we had both. So we had up to 10 million Rand, up to 10 years imprisonment or both. FICA, up to 100 million or up to 15 years imprisonment, not both. And then the two pieces of legislation that assists the FIC in combating money laundering and terrorist financing is POCA and POCTATARA. Yesterday I was at a FIC event and they had such an elegant way of pronouncing it. I said POCA and POCTATARA. I think that's how they said it. But POCA and POCTATARA. Okay. POCA and POCTATARA, you don't need to know the ins and outs. You don't need to know when they became effective. You don't need to know what the penalties are. You just need to know that they assist the FIC in addition to FICA. They assist the FIC in combating money laundering and terrorist financing activities. Right. Very important thing is just to imagine how this will influence your phase-related business. So if you're an accountable institution, FSB, and you did a needs analysis with the client and you identified financial products that your client really do need, your client is at risk if they don't have these products, and you cannot do customer due diligence, you cannot verify the client's particulars, or the client is on the United Nations sanctions list, then you are not allowed to continue with the transaction, which means that FICA will override phase in that scenario and you will no longer act in the interest of the client, you will act in the interest of our country. Right. That is then the end. I hope I still had your attention at 1 hour and 10 minutes. So just so that you know, well, we wish you good luck for your exam. Please send us feedback. If you had a funny question in the exam, something that you didn't understand, something that confused you, please send it to us. We love, obviously, I go and write the exam as often as I can so that we make sure that our content is relevant. But I don't know every single question that is asked in the exam. So if you come across an interesting question, or a question that you feel, this is something that should be included in mock tests or should be included in explanations, please send it to us. And then in the exam, breathe, calm down, think clearly, read the questions, be on time, and then once again, we started with this one and we're ending with it. Remember your ID. Right. Good luck, enjoy your exam, and yeah, send us your results.